Our clothes, as a mirror, reflect the history of civilization. It is more than second layer, as nowadays fashion and style became the way of self-expression. Seeing deep symbolism in surrounding material things. Speaking via things and rituals is absolutely in Kazakh style. That is why the history of national costume is an incredible world exposing our mentality. Today in the program, what does the belt symbolize? Who and why sews the building cheap? Why are bananas in fashion? Today we will talk about one of the most mysterious attributes of our wardrobe. It is worn by both men and women. For some it's a banal necessity, for others it is a way to correctly put the accents. In fact, little has changed in the millennia since the creation of the first belt. It has always been a functional and decorative element. Nowadays, people wear this accessory every day without knowing what ancient and deep history is hidden behind its leather surface. It is impossible to name the exact date when the belt became part of a human wardrobe. Probably it was invented along with the first clothes. It is known that in addition to its direct functional task, which is holding clothes in place, it also had a symbolic meaning. For example, in ancient Egypt, only the pharaoh and his close associates of the upper classes, necessarily men, fastened handsy flex belt on their hips with rope. Every self-respecting Greek man or woman who lived in ancient times obligatorily belted their tunics, and in the Roman Empire, public appearance without a belt was considered as a barbarous uncouthness and disrespect for customs. The belt also played an important role in the garb of our ancestors, the nomads. So, who has the right to be called inventor of belt? The belt independently appeared in different regions simply because it was impossible to not think of its creation. The first types of clothing, overhead clothing worn by people, assumed the use of a belt to fix one part of the clothing piece to another. Draped clothing assumed the use of a belt for holding clothes. The belt is probably one of the most unique attributes in our wardrobe for the simple reason that literally every nation identified it with something meaningful and special. Thus, among the Greeks, the belt of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, symbolized the supreme power, and a similar accessory of Aphrodite, called cestus, evoked love from everyone who touched it. Scandinavian Thor, when wearing a belt, doubled his strength. It is interesting to know what value our ancestors attached to this attribute. Belt also has a sacred value, which fits into the Tengri three-dimensional picture of the world. It is believed that we live in the middle world. The belt is considered as a symbol of the middle world. All living things, including people, reside in this level, and the belt was a sign of the person's belonging to this level of the universe. Moreover, the belt from time immemorial was considered a symbol of masculinity, both among nomads and among other nations. It was not for nothing that wearing a belt meant preparing for a military action or a campaign. In addition, it was an important element in the initiation process. The presence of this accessory showed that the boy ceases to be a child and becomes a man, a hunter, and a warrior. There is a Kazakh proverb, "Kemir bilbeu belsana, kemil jigit yelsana." The meaning is that a belt adorns the man, and a wise man adorns our world, the society.
They'll be hearing about that if they're not watching right now and thinking, do I really want to fight him?
Exciting, it's an exciting.
let us consider the practical use of the belt by our ancestors. Men always had two main tasks: to protect the people and provide the family with food. In both cases, the belt, кисе-бельбел, became an irreplaceable attribute of the nomad. Weapon was fastened to a man's belt. A warrior without a weapon is not a warrior. Accordingly, this weapon was quite heavy, and in order to properly hold this weapon on the belt itself was thicker, stronger, and wider. Although it must be said that the traditional Kazakh belts were never very wide. The average width of the belt was about 5 centimeters. In some cases wider, when in addition to weapons, various handbags cases were attached to the belt. For example, hunter's belt had several details where one could hang up the tools, such as knife, powder flask, etc. Steel for striking sparks from flint, the battle axe called aybalta, a purse for storing coins. All these necessary items were fastened to the man's belt. In addition, belbel, belt, decoration could tell about the status of its owner. It is believed that the more noble a person, the more plaques he had on his belt and the richer it was decorated. Value in this case was not only in the number of plaques, but also in their shape, combination, and ornamentation. By the way, a man without a belt was deprived of the right to vote at the Kurultai, the People's Assembly, and this was not all.
Традиционный жест признания вины, покаяние.
When a person wanted to confess of guilt and came to Khan or Sultan to ask for forgiveness, he took off his belt and hung on his neck. Hence the Kazakh expression «moindaiman», that is, I take the blame on my neck. I take it on myself. Belts were mostly made of leather. For nomads, cattle breeding was not only the main type of economic activity, but also a source of raw materials. If wool processing and weaving was done by women, then leather processing and embossing was men's job. The goods of our leather crafters were in great demand on the market of the Great Silk Road. There are a lot of different types of belts. If we take a traditional belt decorated with plates, it was made of thick, dense leather and it was finished with metal elements. But there were other kinds of belts, in particular variations of sash, when the fabric bands were used as a belt. If we talk about the attribute of a national costume, then traditional men's prerogative of making belts has survived to this day. The well-known zirger, artist jeweler Yestai Daubaev made his first belt almost a quarter of a century ago. It was a wedding where the groom was Kazakh and the bride was foreigner. Kazakh groom decided to emphasize his national traditions. And since the event was abroad, he focused on the national side. I remember making a buckle, kapsırma, for the bride and a belt for the groom. I remember it being very simple and yet very interesting. It happens that when you do something for the first time, without much knowledge, it turns out to be distinguished by its primitiveness, which becomes its advantage. According to the master, it can take from a week to a month to make one belt. Everything depends on the complexity of the work. Most of the time, as it turned out, is spent on creating a buckle in front of the belt. It is massive, heavy, and all these difficulties come out when soldering. It is hard to solder huge and heavy things. It should be noted that special attention has always been given to the decoration of the fastener, kapsırma. Depending on the status of the customer, it was made of silver, gold, or gilded metal, using different techniques: punchwork, engraving, filigree. Often it was inlaid with precious or semi-precious stones. There is an opinion that the use of buckles on the belt was invented by nomads. However, experts are doubtful. To say that the buckle was invented by nomads will not be entirely correct, because at the same time and even earlier samples of belt buckles already existed. They existed in the 4th millennium BC of the tribes of Mesopotamia, but they differed quite strongly in their appearance and in their functional. The main difference is in technique, therefore the clasp, most likely like the belt itself, appeared in different nations taking into account the features of their outfit and way of life. Nomads, for example, invented kapsırma. By the way, the buckle in the women's belt was the central and most elegant element of the whole accessory, and therefore the craftsmen worked extremely carefully, thinking through even the smallest details. Female belt's basis is made from velvet fabric, and small details are silver with gilding. It is very convenient to wear. It can be regulated. Just imagine a black seraphim with such a beautiful, bright belt. Looks very impressive. Belt also had an important symbolic meaning for women. It was identified with purity and innocence, and also protected from evil spirits. Remember the phrase «совсем распоясался». Etymologically, it describes the state of a person who is not constrained by any framework. By taking off the belt, a person goes beyond the bounds of permissible norms of behavior. Therefore, steppe women always wore belts. It is important to note those women's belts were much more modest than men's, made of fabric wrapped around the waist and fixed with a metal buckle kapsırma. Simplicity of the women's belt, which usually did not have such a large number of accessories, hanging elements, did not provide for the possibility of attaching weapons to it. It was usually more narrow and distinguished by jewelry. Some kinds of ornament in jewelry were more characteristic for women than for men. For example, a thin, elegant floral ornament was used somewhat more often.
Например, тонкий, изящный растительный орнамент использовался несколько чаще.
In the male versions of the belt, rather often more concise, simple decor options were used. There was one more unique thing in the wardrobe of steppe women, a swinging skirt made of velvet, which the Kazakhs call beldimchi and the Kyrgyz beldimchi. This outfit has a wide hem, a narrowed upper part, and consists of 2 wedges. Beldimchi was worn at any time of the year, but especially often in winter, as such clothes did not constrain movements, protected from the cold, and looked very festive at the same time. I, for one, really appreciate beldimchi because it can be worn nowadays and it is very practical. This is the clothing piece appropriate for our modern Kelin daughter-in-law. In the past, women wore beldimchi over a dress or dressing gown after the birth of the first child. It is worth noting that the outfit did not appear out of nowhere. It was prepared in advance by the mother of the bride. This, in all senses warm tradition, is passed from generation to generation for many years.
У нас есть такая традиция, именно дарят бешик после рождения первого.
We have a tradition when bishik, crepe, is gifted after the birth of the first child, and it is obligatory to give beldimchi together with bishik. Because parents, especially mothers, were worried about the health of their daughter and wanted her to regain her health sooner. And I heard that sometimes beldimchi could cover some parts of bishik. It could be used in different situations. Beldimchi was made of bright-colored velvet, blue, red or green, and also using patches of patterned fabrics. Bash beldimchi, white belt, was an indispensable attribute of the outfit. Its length exceeded the waistline. It was fixed in front with the help of ties or buttons. By the decor and technique of execution, it was possible to understand which region or tribe the owner of the given beldimchi was from. And most importantly, according to experts, interest in ethnic clothing is very high to these days. We arranged an exhibition of beldimchi this year, and we made completely traditional beldimchi. The way it was done before, the technique, cutting, sewing, it can be worn in everyday life. At first glance, it's impossible to imagine that such a useful and functional invention as a belt could disappear from a person's wardrobe. However, during its existence, this happened more than once. In 1880s, during the birth of women's emancipation in Europe, leather belts got a second wind, becoming a symbol of women's independence in fashion. The next popularization of the accessory was promoted by English gentlemen. Thanks to them, the belt was considered a symbol of men's elegance and an indispensable attribute of a business person. The next impetus was given by the Cultural Revolution of 1968, or rather the hippie movement. They broke stereotypes and proclaimed new values not only in the public consciousness but also in fashion. As a result, women started wearing leather pants with belts. And then there were jeans. Everyone without exception started belting their jeans with white belts. Fashion trends are changeable, but heavy leather belts with metal rivets are an invariable attribute of modern fashion from season to season. Of course, both in rocker culture and in many others. It can be said that this is a relevant wardrobe piece because we also, as nomads, wear pants that need to be held and fixed with something. Corsets and white belts, metal with texture that resemble the skin of reptiles, decorated with accessories with buckles and without. Every fashion show dictates new trends. Absolute trend of this season is so-called banana bags, which are fixed on the waist with a narrow belt. This trend was in fashion in the 90s and now it's triumphantly burst into the fashion world again. Kendall Jenner, Sarah Jessica Parker, Chiara Ferragni, Fergie and hundreds of other famous ladies regularly appear on the pages of glossy editions wearing this accessory. A famous couturier and entrepreneur, Giorgio Armani, once said, "The importance of accessories is growing nowadays, so invest in shoes, belts, bags, ties, and the like. Then you can update your outfit again and again." Well, it is definitely worth taking to heart the words of the godfather of Italian fashion. It can be a functional belt, the only task of which is to keep the trousers or skirt on the body of its owner. It can be a decorative element in order to emphasize a thin waist. It can be an element of another functional purpose. A wide belt in the version of the corset is used to pull the waist, which is not thin enough. This can be a measure of monetary wealth, because we all know that belts of expensive brands can cost a lot. It is interesting that for a long history of existence, the role and value of a belt have not changed. In the past, the groom's relatives gave the bride's brothers a belt or saddles. This rite was called tartu. Today, a good belt is also an excellent gift that a connoisseur will appreciate, moreover, if it's made in accordance with all the traditional canons. In this case, the belt ceases to be just an accessory and becomes a work of art. When giving a belt, people understand that it will not be worn every day. In most cases, the belt is very bright and wide with a large buckle, and such a belt is not given to everyone, but to those who have a status, a position in society. There were cases when gifted belts were brought to me and I was asked to make out of it a picture in a decorative panel, in a frame under the glass. And it was used as an interior decoration. According to experts, such a gift speaks for itself, and it's given to people whose strength and nobility cause sincere respect and admiration. Strictly speaking, the belt is not associated with anything else in our mind. It's not for nothing that we call our galaxy Milky Way the girdle of the sky, and the boundless and mysterious blue ocean is called the belt of the earth. Nomad's belt should be wide as his road in this world. It should be beautiful, and it should be with elements of metal and leather. Belt, in general, in Kazakh culture, is a symbol of power.
Пояс вообще в казахской культуре, пояс это символ власти.
The belt has never been an ordinary accessory in its entire history. If it disappeared from the wardrobe for a period, it would return with a triumph. Wide or narrow, metallic or leather, bright or very low-key, it always attracts attention. So it was in the days of our ancestors, and so it is now.